You're listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and have your work build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.
Hello, and welcome to the Author Inside You podcast. I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Joining us today is Chase DiMarco, author of Read This Before Medical School. Chase is the host of the Medical Nemesis podcast. Welcome, Chase. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I know we've been emailing back and forth for quite a while now and speaking about the potential of this book being published, but I'm glad to finally be on here and speaking with you.
Well, yes, we're happy to have you also. Well, Chase, you have your Master's of Science, an MBA in Health Administration, and you're currently in an MD PhD program. How do you find time to write a book and host a podcast?
Mine is a very non-traditional background for education. So I actually started off with my master's in educational psychology, and I finished that my first semester of medical school. So the goal was sort of to be able to try to get an online teaching job with that degree so I could try to pay for tuition. That didn't really work out. You really need a PhD for any online, especially graduate or even undergraduate type of teaching positions. So I just kept working on my PhD little bit by little bit as I was going through medical school. And then I've finished all of my rotations. I finished all of my coursework. I still have one more board exam to do, but I put that off for the time being, which is why I'm still an MD candidate at this point, because I have the podcast going. I just started another one called The 1 Minute Preceptor. The Medical Nemesis is actually about educational psychology, learning and creating your own mnemonics. So I've had a lot of cognitive psychologists on there. We've had a lot of memory champions on there. Just great for all around learning. It's not just for medical students. It's really for everyone. Then I started the 1 Minute Preceptor, which goes into the second 2 years. So clinical sciences and what to expect when you start actually rotating in the hospitals, which is the second 2 years for most schools. And I was writing this book, and just kind of because of some of that, I have taken longer to complete my degree than initially planned. But a lot of these other activities have been really educational, and I've met a lot of great people. I've learned a lot along the way. So I definitely think it's been worth it so far.
So Chase, as you mentioned, we've been communicating a lot via email. And in one of your emails, you wrote something like, I feel I could write a what not to do when it comes to publishing a book. But now that you finally have the book done, what were some of the things that you learned along the way that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, that might be a good title for this episode too, what not to do. It's been a long journey. So I had just a brain drop onto a Word document when I started this year, and I had the idea, the concept of writing a book, but I didn't really have an organization to do so. Didn't have the document organized. I didn't have enough content, and I didn't really have an audience. So it was always in the back of my mind, but I didn't really know what to do next. And it wasn't until I started my podcast and joined up with a group of other physicians and medical student podcasters through Inside the Boards. It's sort of an unofficial network that we have together. It now consists of 6 or 7 different podcasts, I believe. And that sort of gave the platform in which to write this book and to launch it. But through actually doing so, had a lot of issues with some people saying they were going to be on board and then not wanting to after a while. Had a lot of issues with formatting the book. That was a giant nightmare. Never use a freelancer for that. You can use them for the cover. You can use them for a lot of other stuff, but don't use them for that. I've had people drop in, drop out, commit to things, failed to follow through with them. Had issues with little things that I didn't think I would, such as publishing it to Amazon. I couldn't get my old book that I wrote years ago through CreateSpace. It was really bad. Don't go back and read it. And get that to link to my author account. And I'm still having some issues with formatting through Smashwords and Ingram Sparks, but at least it's on Amazon, which is my main focus right now anyway. So it's been a long and quite frustrating journey. And this book was initially supposed to be released, planned for it anyway, probably 3 or 4 months ago, and only was released in October.
Well, congratulations for releasing it. That's great. So you talked a lot about how people came and left and didn't want to follow through. How do you think you could have remedied that?
Well, I think it's difficult with the group that we're working with. A lot of it has to do with this other group inside the boards that I work with. My personal group is called FreeMedEd, so freemeded.org is a friend of Inside the Boards, and I'm on the board of directors now for Inside the Boards as well. But everyone sort of has their own groups, and we come together somewhat unofficially under this umbrella. And everyone has their own idea of what should be done and how to proceed with it and what the ultimate goal for the end product is going to be. So when we had differences in opinion, I had pretty much written the first draft already. So there wasn't too much that could have been done on my end at that part. But, there wasn't any ill will or anything like that. Just, okay, I think I'm going to step out on this one. It's not the ultimate goal of what I wanted to do. So I did get a little bit of that, which was frustrating just because it wasn't expected. There's some contributions there that were planned for and then had to be sort of rewritten afterwards without that contribution added in. But it wasn't that big of a deal in the end, and everyone's still good friends. So I'm glad it's done. Yeah, exactly.
So you had this nice collaboration. So you wrote the first draft, you said, and then you had collaborators, correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I wrote almost the entire first draft, minus a few little sections that one of the co-authors, Greg Rodden, helped out with quite a bit.
Okay, so now you're talking about graphs and other illustrations. Did you have a say in that?
Most of them started from tools that I had seen in other places, either other study books or, like I said, some of it came from Operations Manager and other business classes that I'd taken through the MBA. Some of it came from different mnemonic techniques and resources I had read there. So I just sort of consolidated all of these different resources into their associated part of the book. And that's where most of the tables and charts came from. So if it didn't make sense to one of the co-authors and they mentioned something, we kind of had the shared Google Docs thing going on, and they would make a suggestion here or there. But ultimately, at least initially, I had ultimate say on anything that was changed. And then we got a little bit looser with that as more of it was completed and the structure was there.
So what about the editing of your book? Did you and your friends do the editing, or did you hire someone?
Good question. Yes. So for the editing, initially we were doing it mostly ourselves. First, we had one of the authors, the co-authors, go through and edit it. Then we started to use Grammarly a bit, but there's some limitations. I think for Google Docs, it's like 10,000 words or something like that, and then it doesn't work properly. So we kind of had all three of us going through and editing it, and asked two other members of Inside the Boards to go through it and if they noticed anything too. So I'm sure there are still mistakes because we did not have it professionally edited, but it is immensely better than my poor grammar and sentence structure before.
Okay. And then you mentioned also about freelancing a book cover. So whatever happened with that? Did you freelance for the book cover?
I did. So I used the same Upwork freelancer. I don't use Fiverr anymore, but you can use either one of those. And the same one that created my two podcast cover arts, since they came out very well, I asked if he would like to do the book cover art too. And I think it came out pretty good, and most of the other members Inside the Boards and the co-authors seem to agree, and my friends that I posted it online to get their comments from seem to agree. So it seems like the art aspect was easier, especially since I had used him previously for graphics, for cover design. I would suggest not doing so much with formatting, because there are a lot of little rules there that you think you can read a document and be able to do it, and it's just not that easy.
You're better off paying someone, right?
Probably, yeah.
Right.
You can still find people on freelancing websites, but make sure to check their qualifications, see how many they've done before. Do your due diligence, basically, and it'll save you a lot of the headache later on.
With everything going on, what made you decide to write a book?
I really think I had this idea, not for the book necessarily, but for educational material since the beginning. So I started freemeded.org during my first semester at medical school. And a lot of it was due to myself and other classmates and even friends that were going to other medical schools. So it wasn't specific to my school, not necessarily being happy with the education they were getting. You get some good instructors, you get some bad, and you get some that are really, really intellectual about their material, but don't always know how to decipher it for us. So I started combining extra resources and free resources, YouTube videos, quizzes, all kinds of stuff like that on freemeded.org. So my classmates could just go there and see what's there. It was all organized by our class schedule, basically. And after a while, I'm like, well, I really want to make my own content. I can only do so much with these bits and pieces that I'm copying and pasting and making playlists with. So I had started creating my own courses. I did end up publishing one so far, and it took so long.
Wow. I can imagine.
I was almost finished with it the first time, and then I was using this platform called Prezi Presentations. It's sort of an alternative to PowerPoint, and then they switched up their entire system, and you couldn't transfer the classes on that you already made. So I had to recreate that whole course, and then you realize when you're making something like that how much information you're really not sure that you know. You think you know, but you have to fact check it. And I got to this point, well, I made that first one, but I really think a book might be a little better right now. Let's do something for studying. Let's do something that's going to be relatable to the interviews that I'm conducting through the Medical Nemesis podcast. So every time I would interview someone, I'd make a little note. Did I add something like that into the book? Is there something useful there that I can pull out? So in the end, this sort of becomes a book that I would have written for myself many years ago, but with the added knowledge and experience of all of these experts that I've interviewed over the past few months, almost a year now.
Wow, that is great. And so that you were taking notes all along and adding to it.
Yeah, and that actually became a bit of a problem because I didn't want to stop adding to it. I kept wanting to add more and more every interview. I'm like, oh, that's a good point. Have I added something about that in there? But in the end, it just, every time you do that, you have to reorganize a section or find extra citations, or fact-checking this book was actually very difficult because we have over 280 citations, and we tried to make most of them as peer-reviewed material as possible. Some are just sporadic links because there's not peer-reviewed material in everything we discuss. And we really just wanted to condense it as much as possible too. So in the end, we had to get rid of a lot of information and just summarize some key points just to get the general learning concepts across to students. And then from there, they can always contact us with questions. And maybe if it takes off, we'll have an online course or something like that, or schedule meetings once a week, once a month. But this is a great starting point for anyone planning on going into medicine or any healthcare, nursing, physician assistant, anything like that, just because it gives them so much useful information on how to learn, which they probably didn't learn in their previous education.
Sure, right. And so you're creating a community, and then you'll have a community who's ready to buy something else and something else down the road, which is just fantastic. Great thinking.
That's definitely the goal. Through Free Med Ed, obviously, the goal has been free or affordable education materials. But after running the website and social media for years, 2 podcasts for free, the online course was free. This is the book is our first sort of for pay product, I suppose. And it's really affordable. And we're about to start a holiday sale in a couple of weeks too. That's basically going to make it so we don't make any money off it, but just so people can get it over the holidays if they really want it, or if they're curious about the material. And then hopefully it'll act as a lead funnel into future endeavors.
Right. Sure. Get more people interested. Have you thought about creating the book as a textbook?
It is a little too unstructured for that, I would say. It really mixes aspects of a textbook with aspects of self-help, with aspects of just our personal experience, as the other 2 co-authors for the book are both currently practicing MDs. It would be an interesting textbook if there were more relatable and peer-reviewed material on some of the topics, but some of it is just not really that stable yet. Newer topics, we cover a whole section on personal psychology and development, from grit and deliberate practice and the imposter syndrome and all these other little things that are really really useful, especially for students that feel these very frequently, but might not know about the topics or might not want to read a whole book on the topic. So we summarize a lot of that. We have a whole section on nutrition and physical activity and what the science actually says about that, and meditation. And there's a lot more self-help in the first part of the book. And it's a 4-part book. So first it's kind of self-help and organizational structure. A lot of the information from my MBA, actually, from operations management and that type of organizational structure, was implemented in a student context. So it's really mixing a lot of different fields together that would make it difficult to write into a textbook format, I believe.
Okay. Well, the reason I brought it up was just because we've had 2 kids recently go through college, and I know how expensive textbooks are. So somebody must be making some money on textbooks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. One of our co-authors, Ted O'Connell, he has a couple other books that are quite popular in the medical field called Step 2 Secrets and Step 3 Secrets. And those are published by a very large publisher. So I don't believe that most of that goes to the author.
Oh, okay. What kind of advice would you give us who are writing a book or who are in the middle of writing a book and we haven't yet published it?
Well, it definitely depends on what type of book. I don't have too much advice when it comes to fiction right now. That is just very complicated, especially when it comes to the advertising. I listen to a lot of shows on it, but I don't have the experience in that. When it comes to more nonfiction type things, organization and scheduling is definitely helpful. I know a lot of other authors have recommended similar types of advice, and just setting down maybe an hour or two a day or certain days a week that you are going to dedicate to it help a lot. So when I was getting stuck, sometimes I wouldn't touch the book for a week or two. And then I'd have to implement something like this where, okay, my watch just went off or my phone just went off. I'm sitting down for the next hour, hour and a half, and I'm just going to write. I'm not going to do anything else. Even if I don't write anything, I'm not going to get distracted by anything else. And that really helped. So I was able to put in a little bit of time every day and really knock out the last couple sections that were kind of elusive.
Mm-hmm. Time management can be difficult.
Oh, yeah. Very difficult, which is also why we cover so much time management in the book.
I got to check out this book.
Yeah. Oh, I think anyone can use your book. It sounds like you have a lot of useful information for everybody.
I hope so. And we actually, for anyone that wants to hear a little bit more, I did make a podcast miniseries. So there's one episode, short 10, 15-minute episode about each part of it that we can add to the show notes maybe.
Sure.
And that's also available through the Medical Nemesis podcast. Excellent.
Great. And are you thinking about making an audiobook of Read This Before Medical School? I guess it wouldn't be called Read This Before Medical School then, right?
Yeah, that would be kind of I wonder if you could change that. I'm not sure how that would work. But the reason I hadn't really considered it too seriously is other books that I have listened to that have a lot of charts, facts, and figures in them, yes. I can't really understand. And some people are better at that than I am. I'm still very visual. And if I can't see them in front of me, when people try to describe them, it doesn't work. And we do have quite a few charts and tables. A lot of these are for the students to use. They can copy them and paste them into their own scheduling. So it's little tools that they can use. And we actually do have a free PDF downloadable for anyone that wants it, freemeded.org/medstudent. So you can get a little brief introduction to some of the topics that we cover.
This episode of the Author Inside You podcast is brought to you by Scribophile. You can find it at scribophile.com.
Scribophile is a wonderful writing community. When you go to their website, you'll find some people who left reviews. Some examples are, Scribophile not only taught me the value of peer critique, but also introduced me to people I now consider good friends.
Another review says, my years on Scribophile have given me a master's level education in writing. The critiques are great, but I've learned as much from reading and analyzing other writers on Scribophile. I don't think I could have polished my novel to the publishable level without this site. I am an addict.
One more review. At Scribophile, I've made friends, developed valuable critiquing relationships, published my works, built my author platform, and gained lots of confidence, all with the constructive support of the community. There's no better site for writers than Scribophile.
Thanks again to Scribophile for sponsoring this episode of the Author Inside You podcast.
I know some authors are interested in starting a podcast along with their book. Can you tell us a little bit how you started your podcast?
I think I was really lucky when I started. I have never been shy about reaching out to people online. So anytime I find a podcast or a course or something that I like, as I did with you guys, I will just reach out and say, hey, I like your show.
Thank you.
And you're very welcome. And that's what I had done initially with the Inside the Boards podcast. It's a very popular medical education podcast, and it was started and mostly hosted by Dr. Patrick Beeman, who is one of my buddies. And I had spoken to him for several months prior to deciding to go with a podcast. And initially, he wanted me to join his podcast and just have a little segment of every episode or every few episodes. But I really felt like I had enough content and enough plans, and I'd reached out to enough people for potential interviews early on that I could make an entire show out of it. Now, without the initial spur of interest from from the rest of the network mentioning it. So Patrick and the others involved in Inside the Boards did mention it on their podcast, and that sent a lot of initial audience over. It probably would have been much slower to grow than it has been. So that was a great boost initially. And then we've had a lot of organic traffic from there just because a lot of the content is very unique for graduate learners and healthcare students and professionals. They have not heard this material before. They're not aware of it. So we have had a lot of, I consider, evergreen material for most of our interviews. You can go back in 3 years from now and it'll still be useful. And we've had a lot of organic growth because of that, I believe.
Mm-hmm. So I listen to lots of podcasts and they talk about finding people who are in your same niche or niche, however you want to say it, and becoming friends with them and connecting with them. And a lot of people are apprehensive about that because you think of them as competition, but there's such a great big world out there. And then here you got together with other people who were doing podcasts similar to yours, and it only helped grow yours. So it really does help to get together with people who are doing the same thing as you after the same audience.
Yeah, I think Patrick and I shared the very same values that co-opetition is much better. So Inside the Boards is very open to collaborating with others. Free Med Ed is very open to collaborating with others. Anyone that wants to join up, help us out, join with your own product, it doesn't really matter. We can help each other out. We can build together. And our products are a similar audience, but they're not strictly competitive too, which helps it out in this instance. But we all kind of think that we're busy and this material needs to be out there, and anything we can do to help each other get there sooner and not crash and burn along the way, or just get, burnt out and not want to do it anymore, is a benefit to all of the audience.
Well, Chase, I imagine the answer is go to freemeded.com to find your contact information. But what's the best way for people to reach out and contact you?
So there are a ton of ways, but probably one of the easiest ways is, yes, freemeded.org. You can go to freemeded.com. It'll redirect you to freemeded.org. So that's short for free medical education, obviously, and freemeded.org/medstudent for the free PDF. And it'll also link to the Amazon page if you want. Or you can just email me at medicalnemonist@gmail.com. Also have chase@freemeded.org. So lots of different ways there. Both the Medical Nemonist and Free Med Ed are on all the social medias. Well, most of them anyway. So anywhere there, it'll get back to me somehow.
Great. It's all in the show notes. Well, Chase, I apologize. We haven't talked about whether this is a physical book or an ebook.
Good question. It is both, at least on Amazon right now. Still trying to work on the other distributors, but the Kindle version and the paperback version are both open, available on Amazon currently.
Excellent. Are you selling the paperback in any physical stores or just online?
Currently just online. We really wanted to see where this is going. And again, not having a large budget for this product and then the others being currently active physicians, there's really not a lot of time to go and do the bookstore deal from my understanding of how that works anyway. Plus, I don't want to throw more out there, but I'm kind of working on 2 other projects at the moment now that this is finally posted. So yeah, low on time.
Right. You don't need to sleep anyway, right?
Oh, I wish that was true.
Well,
we do cover sleep patterns in the book as well.
Right. Well, I imagine your audience, which are probably, let's say 22 to 32-year-olds roughly, right? Those are probably the people getting ready to go to medical school. They're probably more interested in a Kindle book or an online version or buying it from Amazon than going to a Barnes & Noble.
We have currently sold more Kindle versions, and I think that's just easier for a lot of people. Personally, I have trouble with digital books. I do read them sometimes, but I prefer in hand. And a lot of the medical textbooks, students still prefer that way. So we're kind of wondering which way this is going to go when they know more about the type of book it is. Some just have a preference for different genres of medical education material in different formats. But right now, it looks like the ebook's probably going to dominate.
Right, but it's great that you can offer it both ways.
Yeah, and I thought initially that it would be good to have a hard copy just due to the graphs and stuff inside. But that's when we took all of those out, or most of them anyway, and made the separate PDF that they can download on our website. So they're really not losing anything out if they get the Kindle version.
Mm-hmm. I like the text layout on your book cover, Chase. It's great how the read this is so big, and then the medical school is a different color. It really stands out.
Yeah, I think that was a great addition that he thought of. So actually, the whole name of the title, we went through several renditions, and this was far from the initial title I picked. But one of the members said, you know what? Just have it read this and it'll stand out. And you can't really pass it up once you see that. It's just subliminal. So I think it'll work out pretty good.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. As soon as you see read this, you're like, oh, what do I need to read this? What is this?
What's the next line after read this, right?
Exactly. So hopefully we're going to be in the works of making like a read this before nursing school, read this before physician assistant school, and sort of do one for all the healthcare. But really, if you're currently about to join any of these types of healthcare professions and schools, you can utilize almost all of this book. It's very generalizable to the information you're going to get. The only thing that'll be different is the section that's specific about board exams in medicine, but the rest of it can be utilized by anyone that has a lot of information they need to learn, or anyone in a healthcare profession.
Excellent.
Well, I want to say thank you to you because you seem, and your collaborators, because what a nice thing to do. You're trying to help others, which Matt and I believe in. That's why we have this podcast, to help motivate people. I know there's a lot of competitive people, and it's very difficult, and sometimes people can feel, like you said, the imposter syndrome in any field. Why am I here? Well, there's other people with so much confidence. So I think that you're trying to help people is something wonderful, and I'd like to thank you for being a nice person and giving away knowledge.
No, thank you. And anyone that does feel that, you are not alone. Everyone feels it, even if you can't tell they are. We cover that in the book a little bit too, but do not compare yourself to anyone else. All you can do is compare yourself to your previous attempts and try to improve on that.
Right. I always tell my kids, this is your journey. Stop worrying about where if someone else you think is ahead of you, it doesn't make a difference. This is your journey. Just relax. It's going to be okay.
Exactly.
Well, Chase, it's been great having you. I think that seems like a good place to wrap it up for today. So thank you very much for sharing everything with us.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I hope your audience finds some useful information here.
If you know somebody who's a student who has a great deal of information they need to retain, tell them to check out this episode of the Author Inside You podcast. And until next time,
right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.